Can you hear me? Because I think I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Because of my DJing, you're super loud, ma'am.
I'm super loud.
No, that's on my end. I just
Oh,
need to adjust my end because
okay.
because it's going crazy in the
Uh-huh.
ears. How are you
That's
doing today?
I'm all right, and you?
I'm good. I'm live and actually getting it done. If I'm breathing and I'm walking around, I'm doing better than some people.
Right?
That's how I look at it. Is hey, it could be a lot worse, man.
Yeah.
It could get real terrible real fast.
Yeah.
So I'll take it that way. So we'll get into it in just a second. We'll wait for a few people to join.
Okay.
I was trying to throw it up on Instagram. There's like a program that you have to use in
Mhm.
between whatever you're doing in Instagram. And for whatever reason, it never completely does what it's supposed to do. And I just gave up on it because it's
Mhm.
better to be on time than,
Yeah.
have
Play around
Instagram.
with that.
Right. I mean, you know what? It's on
Mhm.
every other social media outlet.
Mhm.
Did you share it out?
I didn't get a chance.
You're too busy.
Yeah. It's been one of those days.
You're too civic minded and you're too community oriented. You got
Mhm. And creative.
yeah, and all that creativity and time.
Mhm.
So you want to start? Let's start at the beginning. At the
Okay.
beginning, I guess where are you from, and how did you get into writing, or what started that?
Lord. I am originally from New Jersey. I grew up in New Jersey. And how did I get into writing? It's like that Toni Morrison quote where if you can't find the book you want to read, you have to write it. And so I was that kid that would spend hours in the bookstore and the library trying to find the book, something that I wanted to read at that moment in time and just couldn't find it and put my finger on it. And then after I got out of my head and out of my own way about who am I to think I could write a book or have anything to say, I just started. I think I had a creative assignments in high school. One of them got put into the high school literary journal for the year, and then that's when I was like, okay, maybe I have some kind of talent with this. Carried it through in college, taking creative writing classes. Was selected for the Callaloo Journal collegiate program that came through, and then just started doing short stories. We're getting them published, and the rest is history.
What was your first short story? And then was that at a collegiate level, or was that earlier?
I wrote my first short story in college. Yeah.
What was it?
Oh my god. It was I wrote it in my senior year. Ironically, it was about best friends, um, the day after graduation when they're packing up to leave and saying that last goodbye, and, thinking all the things that go through your head as you make this major life change, so, yeah.
All right, you being a Spelmanite, are you gonna talk about Spelman? You
I
gonna?
can, sure.
I mean, you should. It influenced you. It was your a cat part of, I guess, partially a catalyst.
Yeah, I mean, that's kinda how I met you. You want me to talk about how Spellman influenced my writing?
I think so.
Okay, well, basically, this book is very, very Spellman-y. The scenes where everybody comes together for that first day in the barracks when it's all these black women getting to know each other, that came from my experience of being at Spelman my first day, and the conversations we had. Getting used to your first roommate is in there, and then just the whole experience of no matter where in school and outside of school, no matter where you are, what you're going through, if you need a helping hand, there's usually somebody nearby, Spelmanite or otherwise, or part of your group, that's there to lend a helping hand. Might not always be your most favorite person in the world, but when it's the world against us, more often than not, we're the ones who have each other's back, if nobody else. So that's one way. Just part of my real life experiences at Spelman. Also, the curriculum in center every class, every experience centers the Black female experience. And so for me, it was very important in this book that yes, there's the because it's set in the 1940s. Yes, you have the racism and the sexism, but it doesn't define the book, and it doesn't define these women and what they did. They lived their lives, and then, as these things happened to them, they dealt with it, they responded to it, and it's not and from my research, I try to put it in as much fact-based, even though they're fictional characters, as I could. So even though in popular culture we get that image of black people in Jim Crow, having these experiences, and it's always like, okay, you put your head down, you shuffle along, yes sir, yes ma'am. That wasn't always the case. I was reading about instances where people would talk, say something or talk back in very clever and creative ways, where even the white person had to like take pause and maybe laugh or whatever. Or even the very true story where you had a 28-year-old black female major stand up to a white male general in the middle of a war, where she could have almost had was court-martialed, where she could have, if they decided she was being mutinous, could even be killed because of the rules of the laws of wartime. And he gave her an order that went against the mission of the group, and she told him, "Over my dead body, sir," and got away with it. We don't know about these stories, and we need to know about it, other than what we see. Oh, if you talk back, you're going to immediately get shot or lynched, or something bad is going to happen to you. And in that particular instance, when she did that, um, he gave her a hard time, but going forward, once it was resolved, he was her biggest champion and biggest supporter while they were in Europe. We don't hear about that. A lot of the times back in the 40s, it's unheard. I was shocked in some of the stuff I was reading about in the real life stories of these women.
So where did these stories come from when you did your research? Where did you gather all of this information, and how did you gather it?
Well, it all started with this picture right here. I've always been a history geek of some respect. Always read up on World War II, and I knew there was a women's Army Corps, and I knew there were black soldiers, but I had never seen black women in uniform during World War II. So when I saw this picture, I was just like, "Oh my God," because I knew that was World War II era uniforms, and that was Europe. So I knew they were overseas, and I had to go basically just do a Google search of black women World War II in Europe, and I was surprised where how it was the 688. It was the 688 Postal Battalion that came up, and there was articles written about them. There was books written about them. Their commanding officer, who I talked about before, Major Charity Adams, had published her memoirs before she passed. So learning about them and their story and who they were was actually fairly easy. It was kind of what they call a hidden figures. They were hiding in plain sight. A lot of them didn't talk about their experiences once they came home, or what they did, or maybe it's like one of those things where it's common knowledge to you, and you just don't, because you lived it, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal. But once I was able got into it, I was able to read to serve my country to serve my race by Dr. Brenda Moore. That was it's a scholarly text, but it's a very easy read. And back when they were still doing their reunions in the 80s, she would go and interview the surviving veterans, and learning about their experiences, why they enlisted in the Women's Army Corps, what they were doing before, what their parents were doing, their levels of education. So that was like that was really interesting, given, we're coming with World War II, we were coming out of the Great Depression. There was the history of sharecropping and Jim Crow, just to see the various experiences that black people were having or living at this particular point in time. And just to back up, in case people are not familiar, my book is called Sisters in Arms, and it's fiction. It's a novel about the black women who served in the U.S. military during World War II.
Real quick shout out. There's a random Facebook user that said this is very enlightening, and they thank you for being here, Kaia. Basus the DJ, shout out. Groove Now, what's up? Noah Hirschman, how are you doing? And Lady No is that Lady? I gotta tell you, some of you guys' names are gonna get butchered because
Mhm.
my feed of how the feed for all my people that are listening, and that your questions, I can read your questions, but sometimes I can't actually read your name properly. So I apologize if anybody doesn't get a shout out, or has a question for Kaia that I just somehow miss. I only have so much of a window to see it, but we'll definitely get it on. And in
Mhm.
the future, maybe we can invite some of these people on so they can directly ask people questions. And, that's another logistical level I'd like to get to. But moving on,
Nope.
tell us about the
Postal
postal unit,
battalion.
that battalion. I've never really heard of it, or I don't really know a lot about it. So educate us.
Okay, definitely. The 688 Postal Battalion was the only all-black, all-female military unit to go. I shouldn't say military unit, but the all-black, all-female Women's Army Corps unit to go overseas during World War II. They went over in February of 1945, and they first landed in. They were sent to Birmingham, England, to sort the mail. Because what had happened is, so if they were there in 1944, backing up, D-Day is 1944, and so once the Allies went onto the continent, went into France and pushed and started pushing the Germans back, the focus was not on getting letters and packages to the soldiers. It was moving forward, breaking through barriers, getting weapons and whatever they needed so that they can continue winning the battle, so they could win the war. And once that campaign was successful, military brass was basically saying, "Oh, this war will be over by Christmas 1944." So again, we're focusing on weapons, bullets, things like that, moving people to where they need to be. Well, Christmas 1944 came and went, and the war was still going on. Obviously, we know that it ended in May of 1945. So at that point, around that time is the Battle of the Bulge. They were taking U.S. military was taking heavy hits, heavy losses, and they hadn't received their mail. And if anybody's been in the military or even away to sleepaway camp, mail call is your lifeblood to the outside world. If you're, especially if you're in the military and you're in a tense situation, sometimes that letter from home from a friend that's encouraging gives you the willpower you need to do what you need to do the next day. So that's when the War Department decided, okay, we need to do something about this mail. At this point, the mail had been sitting in um, airplane hangars in Birmingham, England. And if you've ever seen the World War II era airplane hangars, they're the semicircle long, and the mail was basically piled up from floor to ceiling, front to back. And it was six of them. It was a couple million pieces of mail. So for the people who were already over there, they were assigned the task to sort out this mail and get the mail moving again, and they couldn't figure it out. It was a total mess. Then they had some of the women who were there. They sent them there to figure it out, and it was a total mess. So once at this point, it was a critical task, but it was now this impossible task. So they said, okay, we'll let the colored girls do it. So they sent 855 women over to sort the mail. Because of security, they didn't have any heads up on what they'd be doing. Most of them did not have any mail distribution or sorting experience or training. They just kind of showed up and were like, here. By the time they get there, we have all these sacks of mail filled with letters. People were sending Christmas packages. So Auntie June's fruit cake had been sitting there for a couple months by then. The rats were eating through it. Hair pomade probably exploded, was all over the place. And you also had sometimes a lot of the time, or in many cases, you have letters that just said to Johnny, here's his unit somewhere in Europe. So somebody would have to open up that letter and see if they figure out which Johnny or Johnny Smith. Or in the book I put there's 15,000 Robert Smiths in the U.S. Army in Europe during World War II. If somebody says to Bobby Smith, you have to figure out which one it is. So these women came over and started from scratch with no computers. They created basically an index card system for every person, American soldier, brass, Red Cross, what have you, that was in Europe. Every time they moved, that card would have to be updated. If somebody was wounded, you had to put which hospital, where they were moving to. If they were deceased, you also had to put that. And they were given 6 months to get the mail moving again, and they completed this impossible task in 3 months.
That's incredible. If you need something fixed, call a black woman.
Yeah, basically.
Because my washing machine in my house was actually fixed recently. There's a black woman. She's got
Uh-huh.
a new business here. I got
Oh,
to put it on my
cool.
website and help her out. Yeah, she's great. She
That's dope.
actually was like, "Yeah, you should just get a new machine." And she Googled it and found a way to fix the machine without having to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars. It's
Mhm.
pretty fantastic. How would the world function without us? Lady of VA,
Lady
it,
Nay of
it
VA, what's up?
Late night VA, it wouldn't. I mean, honestly, women are, like everyone, like men, are an
Mhm.
integral part of how our society functions. Our society would cease to exist without women, and people just, I don't know why they think that one could exist without the other. But whatever,
Mhm.
keep thinking that. Just like they think that the world might exist without black people. But
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
have fun with that.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Keep writing science fiction without black people in it and making movies without black people in it. Go ahead. It's super realistic and believable. Um, how did how do you put this together in terms of a process? Now let's look
Okay.
back, look at
Mhm.
some of your other books,
Mhm.
and perhaps talk about how your process has grown from one step to the next.
Um, I first saw that picture about 8 or 9 years ago, and when I saw it and got a sense of time and place, I was writing romance at the time, and I was like, "Oh my god, I wanna write a historical romance novel about soldier girl's last night in town before she ships off overseas for war." And I did, like, in my head, I was like, "No one would ever wanna read this shit." And basically, I wanted to write it, I was excited about it, so I figured I would write it for my own amusement, probably self-publish it, and, my dad, my mom, my sister, and a couple other people would read it, and I would be satisfied with that. So I researched it, but I didn't necessarily do thorough because it was like, "Oh, it's just me reading it, who cares?" So I had it all set around last night in New York and this beautiful romantic thing at Christmas time and Rockefeller Square and all this other stuff in Midtown Manhattan. And I had about 100 pages of that. And it basically centered on that night. And then she went off to war. And then when she comes back, he's there waiting for her, and they live happily ever after. So it was never, I didn't necessarily have a deadline for it. I just worked on it here and there. Would get frustrated, put it to the side. Life would happen, put it to the side. Would get some crazy feedback from people who didn't understand the history. At one point, someone said the only way I would ever be successful with this story is if I made the love interest a white man so that there'd be enough conflict, other bullshit like that. So that I would get discouraged, put it down. And about probably 4 years ago now, my now editor floats this same picture on her Twitter feed and said, "Somebody write me this book." And my friends who are also writers who knew what I was working on were like, "Kaia, you got to talk to her." And so I built up the nerve to respond to her. We talked about it, and she said, "I don't want a romance novel. I want a women's fiction novel." And for those who aren't aware, with romance novels, they usually stay on the shelf for about a month and then they go online and they're all digital. But when you do women's fiction or general fiction, it stays on the shelf in the main section forever and ever as long as people buy it. And so I had to go through that process of, I'd only written novellas and short stories at that point, and now she wanted a whole novel. And at that point, I just it's like I equate it to running. I was doing middle distance 400 sprint and she wanted a whole marathon. So in the middle, I'm running a marathon and didn't train for it and trying to figure it out. So I'm writing this book while learning how to write a novel. So I read I've always been a voracious reader, so in terms of learning about structure and things like that, I was good like that. But I basically had to do a deep dive because I love historical fiction, but I stopped reading it for a while because it wasn't as popular, and you can only read so much about the time periods that were popular. If it's because we go through trends, like right now we're in the middle, probably towards the tail end of the World War II trend, where all the books out are World War II, and you'll hear people say, "I'm tired of reading about World War II." So I had to basically learn that way. The other part of my process is I was just grabbing stuff from everywhere as I was absorbing this time period and the places. Once I got the book deal, and I also did it backwards. If you the typical route of getting a book deal, especially with like William Morrow, HarperCollins, and Big Five, is write the book, you finish it, you get a literary agent, and then you get the book, you shop it around and get the book deal. In my case, the manuscript was not finished. I got the book deal, then I got the literary agent, and then I had to scramble and figure out how to write the book. So if anybody has those aspirations, write the book first, finish the book first, do yourself a favor, because it was very crazy in my household for about a year and a half as I went through all of this. But once I got the book deal and I was like, okay, my research and all of this really matters. I went and on research trips. So part of the book takes place in Des Moines, Iowa. That's where they trained. So I went to Des Moines, Iowa. There's a museum there now where they train. So I was able to go there, see the displays, um, go into the archives. We were able to look in the paperwork. We saw like a menu from 1942. So I knew what types of foods they were eating. So I wasn't saying anything crazy or anachronistic. I was able to feel the uniforms. So I could tell the difference between what a summer uniform felt like versus a winter uniform. If you watch Band of Brothers and the episode where they were doing the Battle of the Bulge, they talked about how because they thought the war would be over, they weren't prepared. They hadn't prepared properly, and so they didn't have winter clothes while they're out there in the snow getting bombed. They still had their summer clothes on. So I was able to. I knew that fact, so I was able to feel the difference of, okay, what would that have been like, to wear that in the cold. I also went to New York. A good portion of the book centers around Harlem. The beginning of the book, they're in Harlem, so I was able. I spent a couple days in New York walking around Harlem. I grew up in New Jersey, but I hadn't been in a long time, just to soak up the feeling of being in that environment. The trains that that the subways that they took, I went and I rode those subways, and I knew what those characters were going through when they were going from one place to another. So I just put myself in that headspace. I went to where the recruitment office was in Lower Manhattan. I walked around the block, got a lay of the land. So there's a sense in the, in the book I talked about how she she walks the half block from the building. What was that like when she goes and looks at this building and sees these lions sitting by the door? How would she feel about that? Things like that. I
It's pretty
also,
extensive.
I'm sorry.
That's pretty extensive.
Yeah, I even went to Camp Shanks, which is the base. They called it Last Stop USA. Everybody who shipped out to Europe, I think the majority of them went through Camp Shanks. So I was able to go to the historical records. We pulled the newspapers from the base 2 weeks before, through 2 weeks after that. The 6888 was there, so I knew what was going on. I knew the bus schedule, the train schedule. I knew the pie shop had just opened. I knew the entertainment that was coming through. We were able to determine, because of the double segregation by race and by gender, the officers would have stayed with families in the area, which was really cool because I knew at the time my great grandmother owned property up there. So I was able to incorporate my great grandmother as one of the family. I don't know for sure if they did, but she seemed like the type. So I was able to incorporate family history into the book that way, and had one of the officers staying, fictional officers, staying with my great grandparents and my grandmother. We drove the roads they would have marched from Camp Shanks to the pier where they would have loaded up on the ships to ship out across the Atlantic. So it was really cool. And once you're able to say, I'm an author, I have a book deal with HarperCollins, and I need to do this research, people get really excited and are very helpful. So a lot of good stuff.
Fantastic. You want to talk about look back and talk about some of your previous books so people can look back and kind of get your history and maybe find some of those books and read them?
Sure. My previous books are, the first one is Calling Her Bluff by Kaia Danielle. It is a contemporary romantic comedy, and it is about a woman who is a recovering gambling addict, and her first trip back to Vegas when because of her profession, and then she hooks up with the random guy, and he turns out to be security. And then my second one, also by Kaia Danielle, is A Secret Desire, and it is a historical romance set in 1912, and it is about the a woman who's widowed, and she goes back to her family property on the Jersey Shore, and she creates her own black owned resort. So it talks about, it kind of delves into the history of what well-to-do Black people were doing in Washington, D.C., and about the start of these Black resorts, where in real life we had them in Cape May, New Jersey, Martha's Vineyard up in Massachusetts, Idlewild up in Michigan, places like that.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Some of those
Hmm.
places actually still exist, and you can kind
Hmm.
of go see the ruins, if you will,
Hmm.
or the abandoned areas.
Or even in California, they had one, Howard's Beach. I think it's going back to, it was Howard's Beach back in the day when it was Black owned, and then I think somehow they stole it from the family. It became Manhattan Beach, and then in the last year, to rectify the historical injustice, they actually gave it back to the family.
Speaking of historical injustices, in Atlanta, Lake Lanier, they flooded a black town, and they recently used that as a reference in a side of the first episode
Hmm.
of ATL of Atlanta, and
Hmm.
then in the episode they also kind of had a fictionalized version of the kid that got kidnapped in Texas.
Oh wow,
Yeah, I don't know
I
if you
haven't
had a
watched
chance to
that.
watch that yet. Yeah,
No,
it's
but I know I don't
fascinating.
swim in Lake Lanier. Mm-mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You might not make it. Don't
Yeah,
go. Don't do that.
that's too much
There's
bad
what is it?
juju out there.
Yeah, five. I think 500 deaths or something like that
Hmm.
since it's flooding.
Hmm.
Scary,
Hmm.
scary stuff. So when you're writing
Hmm.
for everybody's education, what's your process generally? Like, where do you start? Do you start with the research, or do you start to bang out an idea? Do you make an outline? What's the step by step process? And by the way, real quick, does anybody here in the chat want to be a writer, or is anybody here in the chat actually writing? And if so, what are your questions? Let's move on and then while we're waiting, we'll get some
Okay.
responses.
Um, I'll talk about with the book I'm currently working on. For me, it's my own nerd. For fun, I just go online and look up stuff that's historical for different museums and archives. I'll go and look and see what's in their collection and just scroll through. And I knew at one when I was working on or coming up with ideas for Sisters in Arms, I knew I wanted to do a Negro Leagues book, and I knew a couple women had played. So I just basically did random Google searches, things like that. And I did find there were 3 or 4 women that did play in the Negro Leagues, but while in the middle of that Google search, I found out there were actually 4 women that had owned Negro Leagues teams. And one of them was Effa Manley. She's the one that comes up most prominently. Turns out Effa Manley is the only woman that's currently in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Who knew, right? I didn't know there was a woman had been inducted, and I didn't know that a woman of color, depending on the source you read, who wrote it, they'll say she was a white woman or that she was a black woman. She openly lived black her entire life. If she was out and about downtown and you mistook her for a white woman, that was on you. She wasn't going to correct you because she was minding her business. So, her whole life from the time she was conceived, because no one knows for sure who her father was, to the time she died is like a soap opera, and her life is totally fascinating. So once I found out about her, and I was just like, oh my god. um, there's again a couple books written about her. So I read every book that had been written about her. It was about 4 at the time, and then I started reading about some of the players um, who had autobiographies or memoirs out that played for her or against her, or interacted with her, to see how other people who knew her perceived her or interacted with her. Then I have a newspapers.com account, so I'll go on there and just type in the name and different black newspapers. By the way, if you're writing anything historical, fiction or nonfiction, historical black newspapers are a gold mine, because back in the day, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they were not talking about black people unless something bad happened. But in terms of everyday things, like even with my own family history, I found out a lot of stuff just from the society pages in these black newspapers where they pop up here and there.
You
So
have
Genie,
family in society pages?
yes. Oh my God. My great grandmother was the social butterfly, having tea with people all over the place. And then her aunt was actually a big deal. She was a suffragette. She started her own church in New Jersey. She was like up there with Mary Church Terrell and Mary McLeod Bethune and things like that. So just because by accident I found out what my great great grandmother's maiden name was, I was able to latch onto her sister, who was Reverend Florence Spearing Randolph, and because she was a big deal, I was able to find out that my family, at least that branch of the family, was free 2 generations before emancipation, and I was able to find out where they lived. I was able, once I had the names, I was able to go look them up in newspapers, so I can see where they lived in Charleston. What when people died, I even found out that somebody owned a slave in Charleston. I was able to figure out. My other big that was big Aunt Florence. So I was able to find out all her stuff. But then her niece, the Aunt Florence that I knew, she was one of the last surviving living members or founders of a sorority. So I was able to see things that she did from day to day. My grandmother pops up here and there. So you just never know. Especially they were in Harlem, so in the New York age, I didn't get access to the Amsterdam news yet, but I was able to piece things together. So yeah, if you're into genealogy, you're into history, black newspapers are a gold mine. On familysearch.org, you're able to look up whatchamacface, the census records. So with Effa Manley, who I'm writing about for my Negro Leagues book, I was able on familysearch.org alone, I was able to find her first husband's draft registration card for World War One. So I was able to find them on the 1920 census. So I knew where they lived. I knew she was a housewife in 1920. I knew that he was a chauffeur because she knew like all these famous people, and I couldn't figure out how that happened outside of baseball. And her husband was a chauffeur for the Broadway theaters, so that's how they interacted with people like that. I was able to find out, get the census records for her mother, and on it it says that her father was a mulatto. Um, and I'm not sure if he was black and white or if he was Native American and white or whatever mixture. So the whole argument about Effa Manley, about was she a very fair skinned white person, black person who, was just really loved black people that much, or was she a white woman who chose to live as a black person in the 1920s and 30s? I was able to get some documentation on that, to where a lot of white authors, oh, she was just a white woman who just lived black or loved black men or something like that. That there's more to the story than that. So that was, I just spend a lot of time, and more stuff is getting digitized every day. So one roadblock you may hit today, if you wait a month or two, you'll be able to crack through it. For the longest, I could not find my great grandmother's death records or her death certificate. And I was getting to the point, I was like, well, maybe she left, or she didn't die in my grandmother's hometown. She went somewhere else. And for a year and a half, I just could not find her. And then last year, I was able, they finally digitized her death certificate. So that opened up a whole bunch of information to answer questions for me. Even my mother had mentioned in passing that my great grandmother had been married before she married my great grandfather, and that he had died, and that his last name was Jones. And I think last week I figured out about who found his name from the society columns where the the marriage was announced, and figured out what happened to him. And I had assumed that he had either been he had been a World War I soldier, based on the dates, and actually I was completely wrong. And it was way more fascinating than anything I could have imagined.
Lady Naya VA says, "Are you able to see these chats?" She said, "You're
I
the." She
am.
called you. She called you Alex Haley. She said she
Something
sees more
like
things in
that.
your future.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
I
because there are some genealogy questions that if I can answer, link it. I found a woman with the family name who was born in 1766 in Charleston, but I can't find the link between her and the people that I know I'm related to. And if I can find that link, then that tells that would she was
tell a
either
whole
the
nother
yeah,
story.
she's either the first black person in my family line, born in America, or they lied and she was actually my original African
S-
ancestor here in the United States.
So, are you using FamilySearch.org or is this newspaper.com that
Both.
you're using?
I'm
Okay, you're
using
using both
both,
of those.
and I use it, for my own genealogy curiosity when I get stuck or on board, and also to find out about my characters, and even side characters that I knew people knew. Just it's almost like TMZ, historical TMZ. I found out people's business. Um, like in Effa Manley's case, for whatever reason, her first husband died in her hometown 2 years after her second husband died there, and I haven't been able to figure. I don't know exactly where he died, because if he died in her mother's house, well, there's a whole nother story that no one's written about in terms of Effa Manley. And it was just from really random things that I was able to figure that out.
Fascinating. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's interesting because if you know, I think you probably know this. Chinatown was written based on a bunch of newspaper stories and articles about water rights and
Hmm.
the canal systems and blah 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 and everything they invented in California to make it viable for farming and to make Los Angeles a viable city. So it's interesting how much you can learn and the stories you can come up with simply by pulling them from history.
Hmm. And someone asked for me to name the sites again. It's familysearch.org, and it's free, but you do have to create an account. And then newspapers.com, that you do have to pay for as well. And you can link, it's linked to ancestry.com. I'm too cheap for ancestry.com, so I only use the newspaper part.
You're not gonna take $50 and get your
No.
genetic profile or whatever.
Mm-mm.
Plus, the reality is that they can, a number one, you heard about the guy who got caught for a crime. Imagine if they were wrong somehow and somebody got caught you for a crime, like
Hmm.
as a serial killer or something. And
Yeah,
then, secondly, what information are they gathering about us that they can use in terms of
genetically.
experimentation or modeling?
Hmm.
It's fascinating to think about because you have no rights once you submitted it to them.
Yeah, yeah. So I haven't done it. I have a cousin who did it, and he actually found our great grandfather's brother's descendants, because he did that in like Ohio or somewhere completely where we would never have thought to look.
It's tempting.
Hmm.
You
But the flip side of that, and also why I do this, is to encourage people to ask their elders their stories, so that this history is not lost, so that we don't have to go on websites and give up our DNA, and also to tell the generations behind you our stories. Because I think I mentioned to somebody who was younger than me, yes, I was in Atlanta for the Olympics, and it blew their mind. And for us, it's just like, oh, of course I was there. I was in Atlanta. It's no big deal.
You just weren't at the Olympics. Let's clarify.
Well,
Let's
yeah.
tell that story. Let's tell that story.
Okay. Well, for those of you who don't know, Jason and I go way back. We've been friends for almost 30 years. So, like the night of the Atlanta bombings, we were all in the same place watching this on the news. And while we're watching it on the news, Jason is like, wait a minute, isn't that your homeboy laying in the street? Because at first we were cracking jokes and it was all fun and games. And then it was like, oh, wait a minute. It was, I worked at the record store at Lenox Mall in Atlanta. So it was my manager, my and two of my coworkers laid out in the street. So if you ever look up the articles about that came out the morning after the bombing, and you see those guys laying in the street, those are my friends. And the only reason why I wasn't with them is because they got off work an hour earlier than I did. Instead, I went and hung out with Jason. So the part of that history, and then the other part of it is when
Crazy.
they caught Eric Rudolph, I was actually with one of those people when it happened. So I was with him in real time when the story exploded and his phone starts blowing up, and he's all these people are the news are contacting him for a comment. So that's my relation to the Olympics bombings. But yes, I was there for everything else, and then I have plenty of stories. And for me, I forget about it because I'm like, okay, whatever. That was 25 years ago. But for people who weren't there, or or who are younger, and this is like history to them, they're just like, oh my god, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's bizarre because
Mhm.
you weren't. I was thinking there was one dude that you're dating, and then there was the dude who was the manager of the store, and the
Yeah.
dude who's the manager at the store is the guy who's like, "Yeah, man, they said I've lost 25% of my hearing, and they
Mhm.
don't think they'll be able to take this out of my leg, and blah blah blah." And you think about
Yeah.
all the collateral damage that was created
Yes.
from that. And I was
Yes.
working at SB when they caught
Mhm.
Eric Rudolph, and remember he was going around the Carolinas. He was
Yeah.
hiding out and he was
Mhm.
stealing people's like stealing stuff from garbage and they
Mhm.
thought people were leaving stuff from him and I was working at
Mhm.
WSB at the time and when they found it there were people
Mhm.
who did remote broadcasts for us and they
Mhm.
were telling stories about yeah man they think there's a guy around here, but they can never catch him. And he's like
Mhm.
stealing food and he's like
Mhm.
hiding out in places when people aren't around. And
Mhm.
it's amazing to think A that he got away with it that long when they had that whole
Yeah.
area flooded with people looking for him. And you
Mhm. For
wonder
10 years.
again, yeah, you're
Mhm.
like, was somebody helping this dude?
Mhm.
Because you just don't hang out in North Carolina in the mountains by
Mhm.
yourself for that long and get away with it. At least I wouldn't
Yeah.
imagine that you could. But
Mhm.
it's amazing. At least you weren't
Yeah.
there that night. So
Yeah.
you
And it was just an hour. Had I gotten, I had to work, I had to close up, and they were able to leave earlier, and I wasn't there. My mom was freaking out. It was like one of those surreal things. It was a weird
instead
night,
you were
but
hanging out at Patchwork with Curtis and Bob,
yep, watching TV.
wa- watching it on TV.
But we were like only a mile away because I think I was like sleeping somewhere in the back room, and they're like, "Wake up! There's been a bomb." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I didn't feel anything." But
Yeah,
we
I
weren't
mean,
that far away.
no, we were. I mean, Patchwork. The original Patchwork was on
10th
McMillan
Street.
955 McMillan and 10th Street,
Mhm.
right by where Rocky Mountain Pizza is now.
Mhm.
And that's literally like if you're on a bike it takes 5 minutes to get from there to Centennial Park.
Mhm.
So it's amazing to think that those types of things occurred.
Mhm.
So you've always been a history buff.
Yep.
What other things can you teach us about A, black history, and B, black writers? Because there's so many no
Mhm.
there's so many black writers. I'm wondering what some of your influences are, like Octavia Butler, Toni Morrison, both on either end of the spectrum. Octavia, she's Butler wrote, let's see, how many different, she wrote so many different science fiction things,
Mhm.
and then some of them were series that none of them have been produced in film. I think
N
maybe Ava is working on a film.
I think it's been optioned now, but, like Kindred, they just adapted that into a, graphic novel about 2, 3 years ago. But my influences are my gateway drug into reading Black female authors was the movie Color Purple, which I saw at 9 and read the book at 9. That's a whole different story about. how I was reading really inappropriate material at 9 years old. But I was that type of reader where reading for my age level, I was beyond that. I was reading adult books. I was reading Hollywood Wives and things like that. Um, but from reading Alice Walker, that introduced me to all the other Black writers from the 70s and the early 80s. So my primary I would say influence would be an Alice Walker, a Tina Ansa McElroy, and Zora Neale Hurston. In terms of writing historical fiction, I stand on the shoulders of Beverly Jenkins, the historical romance writer. Um, Without her laying the pathway, I wouldn't even think it would be even possible for a publisher to have interest. And I actually, we're both under HarperCollins. She's with Avon, and I'm with William Morrow. Um, but that would be the beginnings of it. In terms of, but there's a bunch of us coming up. I'm not the only one. There is no, I am the only historical fiction writer, because you also have to, or Black historical fiction writer. There is Piper Hughley. She did a historical romance series centered around the founding of HBCUs. She has a book coming out in June called By Her Own Design about Anne Lowe, who was the designer that did Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress to JFK. There is Vanessa Riley. She did Island Queen. The richest woman in the Caribbean in the 1700s was a Black woman who freed herself. She bought her own, well, not, she's more self-emancipated, but she was, think, if you watched Scandal, think Olivia Pope in the 1700s and all these white men, wanting her and wanting to take care of her, including the King of England. And this is a real life story, and she wrote a novel about it. She has a book coming out this summer about the women of the Haitian Revolution, Sister, Mother, Warrior. Don't quote me on it. It's something like that. There is Kiana Alexander. She just had Carolina Built come out, and it's about the richest woman in Edenton, North Carolina at the turn of the century was a Black woman. She was a former slave who basically became a real estate magnate, and the buildings that she owned and built are still there in Edenton, in the main buildings in downtown. So there's a Denny S. Bryce, Wild Women in the Blues, where she talks about the blues women in the 1920s, and she has a book coming out. I don't remember the woman's name, but she was basically the adopted niece of Queen Victoria. She was an African girl who was gifted to Queen Victoria and grew up in Victorian England. She also has a book about the Rhinelander case. In the 1920s, a very fair-skinned Black woman married the son of a very rich, well-to-do Manhattan family, and when the family found out, they basically sued her for deceiving him, and forced an annulment and in the court case, they made her strip from the waist up so that they could look at her to see how to prove that Black women's nipples were different colors from white women's nipples, and whether or not she fooled him that way. So, and that was like the trial of the century for that particular point in time. So there's a bunch of us coming. And so if you think there's no room for you in this space, no, there's plenty. There's plenty of stories to be told. I have a list of things that I want to talk about that I'll never get to. Like the Rhinelander case was on my list, but it was on the bottom. So I was like, cool, somebody's doing that. So there's a lot of history. I actually focused on early 20th century women's history because every time I went to like Reconstruction or whatever, Beverly Jenkins had done a book about it, and I didn't want to seem like I was trying to be Beverly Jenkins. And there were so many other stories that I want to do. I'm trying to think. I even have people asking me about sequels to Sisters in Arms. I hadn't thought about it, but because of the way I ended the book, and because even one of the main characters, she's a musician. She is a concert pianist who decides who dabbles in jazz. So I'm like a big popular music history nerd. So and bebop is like one of my favorite eras in jazz. So I put a lot of that in the book. And then while I was doing the research to fact check myself is when I reminded myself about the all-girl jazz bands during the World War II era, where everybody had been, all the men had been drafted. It was women, Black and white, who went and created their own bands and things like that. So there's
Fascinating to think about what people were doing during World War II. Even people
Beverly
that we,
Jenkins Roommates is on here. That's so
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, that's Mrs. Sims. Linda Sims
Mhm.
is a good friend of my mother's and a good friend
Okay.
of my family's, and her son Sekou is a very talented musician, a good friend of mine. He's a real estate guy out on the West Coast in Arizona, and she's great. And I'm glad
Mhm.
that you actually got a chance to come through, Miss Sims. Thanks for hanging out.
Hey, Miss Sims.
Yep, very
Excuse
cool.
me. Mhm.
So yeah, glad you caught that. I'm glad that you can actually see who's in here.
Mhm.
Anybody who happens to be on Twitch, you can host this and share it, and then when it's over, I usually post a YouTube video,
Mhm.
which you could share to other people. And don't forget to tell people to visit Kaia's website, Kaia Writes, which is
.com.
accessible, and
Mhm.
that actually has all of your books on it, has some of your
Mhm.
old short stories on it, and
Mhm.
you should put a
The
book list.
comics.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just haven't had the time to sit down with I'm on deadline right now and finishing the baseball book, so I'll fix all that. You can find my website is kaiaalderson.com. On Instagram and Twitter, I am Kaia Writes, and then on Facebook, it's Kaia Alderson Author.
Yep. Follow her and
There's
then
even
tell
a
your
sample
friends.
comic on there that I wrote on the kaiawrites.com website.
It's very cool. I know you made a lot of connections when you were probing and researching and getting into the comic writing thing, which is really fascinating. Now you have Miss Marvel. It's about to come out
Mhm.
from Marvel Studios.
Can't wait.
That she's a very nice woman
Mhm.
that wrote that. She's fascinating, very talented.
Oh, Willow,
There's
right? Willow Wilson?
no,
Oh, no.
no.
Oh, you're talking about the show. Okay.
That wrote the show. Her,
Okay.
her name is, I'll look it up real quick, but there's Willow Wilson. There's another black woman that self-published her comic, and then they
Mhm.
had her coming. I think maybe she was writing. I don't know if she was writing the X-Men for a while. Um, but super
Mhm.
talented writer. It's just really good that there's kind of this revolution going on now,
Mhm.
and that so many people are getting the opportunity to write
Mhm.
and to explore their stuff.
Shout out to Stephanie Williams. She just finished writing the short run of Nubia, um, Wonder Woman's sister, and they're starting a new run of Nubia, Queen of the Amazons, and Trial of the Amazons. So I can't wait for that to come out. I already ordered it.
You already ordered it?
Yeah. I actually had to create a pull list because I'm in a part of Georgia where I don't have a comic book shop that's accessible to me. So I had to create a pull list with like Midtown Comics in Manhattan so I can get all my comics.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow. That's where you're living in.
I'm down on the coast.
You're down on the coast, right?
Yeah, the closest comic book shops to me are either an hour away or an hour and a half away. And with it, they want you to come and at least every 2 weeks come get your stuff, and it's just not feasible for me. So if I miss like an issue here or there, I'll go to the physical store when I'm in Savannah or Jacksonville. Otherwise, to make sure that I get every to support and to get every issue, I just had to order from a comic shop that did provide that service.
So so real quick,
Mhm,
the writers that I met, I did not get the opportunity to meet G. Willow Wilson. That would have been fantastic. She's
mhm,
super talented. But I
mhm.
did get to meet Bisha K. Ali and Sana Amanat during the course of it. So I was really fortunate to be able to work on that. Thanks to Stephen
That's dope.
Crowley and Mike Davis.
Mhm,
Really tight, talented lighting guys. Really cool. And this it's become a really diverse market.
mhm.
You still don't see a lot of black dudes writing comics. It,
They're coming.
yeah, we'll see.
Mm.
We'll see.
Oh, shout out to Quincy Scott. And forgive me, I forgot the name of his comic, but I think he's either doing a Kickstarter or he's doing a short run, and it's about basically a black kid, a black nerd who then gets his superpowers and secretly doing stuff in the night. So we were in a workshop together when he was
Nice.
workshopping it like 7 years ago, and he's finally get that's coming out, so I'm excited for that.
It's exciting.
Hmm.
And don't forget about Brother Man Comics.
Hmm.
Uh,
Or
buddy of
Harriet
mine.
Tubman Demon Slayer, that's a good one.
I've heard about
Um,
that. What's up with them turning all the historic figures into like people that like it's the what is it? Abe Lincoln Vampire Killer,
yeah. Hmm.
Harriet Tubman Demon Slayer. Like what?
It's
Like
dope.
in their spare time. In my
Yeah.
spare time, when I'm not, rescuing people, I'm also murdering demons. When I'm not, trying
Mhm.
to get through, the
Excuse
Civil
me.
War, I'm
Mhm.
I'm murdering vampires. What?
There's another one, the Tuskegee Heirs, which is like the grandkids of the Tuskegee Airmen, and then they're off having their own adventures flying around too. So there's a bunch of
Really?
them. There's like comic shows. They're smaller um, that center around Black comics. Onyx Con in Atlanta is one. It's usually in February and August. I think obviously he shut down for when the pandemic hit. I think last year they were able to get the February one show in person. So if you are in Atlanta, look up Onyx Con.
Got you. Well, what else can you share with us? Because it's coming up on an hour. You got a kid that needs your attention. You got all
A
these
book
various
to
civic
write.
responsibilities. You have another book to finish. And no,
um,
I'm not gonna play Cool C Fabulous Life before you get off because I don't like the every time I play a piece of music, it gets nailed from all directions from like everything. And I write notes like, actually, I worked in the studio on this record, it's da da da, it's not right. We don't care.
mhm. All right,
No
what is it
music.
you want to know?
More information on what you'll be doing
Okay.
in the next upcoming weeks. Any further advice that you have, any of the writers here in the room,
hmm
and anything that you might want to look back on that's been inspirational or something that you might want to pass along to us.
Okay. For the aspiring writers who are listening, number one, take the aspiring off of it. If you wrote something down, you're a writer. If you thought about it, if you worked out the whole story in your head and you just haven't committed it into a tangible form, you wrote it, you created it. If you need permission, if you need somebody to dub thee or knight thee, this is me calling you a writer. Go forth and do it. There's your permission. Do it. Um, it's about button, chair, fingers on keyboard at the end of the day. And even if, like he said, I have a lot of stuff going on, I write in 10 to 15-minute spurts. I got to a point where I know I can do 200 to 300 words in about 10 to 15 minutes. So it's on me at that point. Like, you know how when we were in the office back in the day, everybody would walk around, get their coffee, and say good morning, go door to door or station to station. That's when I would do my 10. I would do a sprint then. At lunchtime, I would do a sprint, and then when I got home and did everything I need to do, if I still had my wits about me, I would write. I would do another sprint. And there were times when I was too tired and I hadn't written a word. And because I hated my job at the time, out of spite, I said I'm gonna write one damn sentence just to say I wrote something a day, because that one sentence brings me one more sentence closer to quitting this damn job. I still have a day job. Don't get it wrong. I just don't work there anymore. But do it. You just figure out your process. It would be nice to have the 2 hour. Like I in the beginning. Oh, I need a 2 hour box of time to do what I need to do. That's horseshit. You're never going to get it done. But you basically just keep plugging, keep doing what you need to do, even if it's one sentence at a time, one paragraph at a time, whatever, until it's done. And then once you have that rough draft done, you can pat yourself on the back and say, I did it. And then you can go from there. It's going to obviously need revisions, but the hurdle between everybody who says, I want to write a book, and even getting a first draft, you're better than, like, you've accomplished more than 90% of the people who have that initial goal. In terms of things that I'm doing, this is the portion where I say, buy my book, Sisters in Arms. This is the one about the Black women in World War II. You can buy it everywhere. You can get it at on Amazon. You can get it in the airport bookstores, which is really freaking cool. If you follow, when the book first came out, it was like a whole big thing of people sending me pictures of seeing my book in the airport. Remember, when I first started this book, in my head, nobody wants to read this shit. So for me, just the fact that it's in the airport bookstores blows my mind. Not saying this happens for everybody, but you just never know once you finish it. This has been a book of the month selection. Steph Curry has his own book club, and he selected it for his November pick. And then for Christmas, they sent all the authors covers of the books that he selected with his autograph on it. So all my male relatives, I had to keep an eye on my Steph Curry signed Sisters in Arms, because my male relatives were looking like they wanted to take it from me. So you just never know what's going to happen. Even with the story of the 688, it's not affiliated with me, but they announced that Blair Underwood is producing a Broadway musical based on the women of the 688. They were just awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. So, you know, who knows? Maybe you have a nobody wants to read this shit idea, and you'd be surprised. Somebody might actually want to read that shit. So get it done. Um, I'm working on the baseball book. The working title right now is In a League of Her Own, and I'm thinking right now it's slated for this time next year, spring of 2023. But first, I got to finish the damn draft. What other nuggets you guys want? I got it.
Where are the accolades? So other
Oh,
than the ones that you named for the book, this it's doing really well out there. So
um, Book of the Month Club. It got a starred review in Kirkus, a starred review in Publishers Weekly. It was a Wall Street Journal book club. book of the month. It was Steph Curry. Oh, I got nominated. I got an email out of the blue talking about I was nominated for Georgia Author of the Year for literary fiction. So I find out in June whether or not who wins. I got some good competition on that. I know I'm forgetting something. All the amazing book clubs out there that have reached out to me and had me that actually picked the book and had their book club read it and discuss it and then invite me to come answer their questions and things. That's been amazing. Oh, I got to be a featured speaker at the American Library Association's conference last year virtually. So I did my very first speech, and that was really cool because it was a video. So I videoed my speech, and then while they're playing it, and there's like 3 or 4 thousand people watching it, and when they had questions in the chat, I was able to answer it. So that was pretty cool. Um, I need to go back and write a list. Oh, I got to do an op-ed in Time Magazine on the website. The book's been featured in Parade Magazine and the Sunday papers. Um, I know I'm forgetting something. It's like my husband and I, we joke, we're like, okay, here's another thing that we never thought would happen with this book. So, oh yeah, that's right. The book, it was in Kroger. That I think I cried when that one when I saw that one out because that it's hard to get into the grocery stores. It was in Kroger. Um, I can't think. It was in Target. I think it was featured in September in Target. It was in Walmart. That blew my mind when I saw it in Walmart. Um, I got to go to I was invited to literary festivals. There's a really dope one, Bookmarks, the Bookmarks bookstore in Winston-Salem. I was able to go there and met some other like really big deal authors, and I was just fangirling a little bit and just hanging out with people. So it's been a wild ride, and I've been enjoying it. And hopefully when we get to a place in the pandemic where it's safer to go and be around people, because I did not get to go to my book is in England actually. The it It's in the UK. So where they were stationed in Birmingham, there is a guy who does a lot of Black History events and awareness in Birmingham, England, and he actually had a copy of the book, and there's a plaque commemorating the 688. So there's a picture of him in England next to the plaque with the book. And then come to find out, because it's available in the UK, the book wound up in there's a library in Ghana. It's a library of the African diaspora. My book with see, I'm a tear up again. So my book is in that library, and like I completely lost it because I was like, oh my god, my book made it to Africa before I did, and that's totally dope.
That means you'll have people waiting for you when you get there.
Yeah. So I'm just it blows my mind every time. Every
Make
time
sure
I
to
think about it.
immediately after this to send me
Mhm.
the links so I can post those with the video.
Okay, I can
So
do
that
that.
everybody can follow up. Everybody
Mhm.
listen, don't forget to share the video with your people so that they
Mhm.
can follow Kaia's ascent into being the next author laureate. And
Mhm.
is there an author laureate? Is I've just made that up. They
Yeah,
should
but
probably
cool. Okay, I accept. And
they should, yeah.
you never know how it gets into the right movie producer's hands. It's out there. We've had some nibbles, but no one's bit yet. So, you know, if you want to see the movie and also, support the book, support your local independent booksellers as well. Because there's been some phenomenal support. Shout out to Julia at the Bookworm in Powder Springs, Georgia. She has been extremely lovely, as well as writing books on St. Simon's Island. They actually have autographed copies that I autographed myself. San Marco Books in Jacksonville, Florida also has autographed copies if you need that. There are several bookstores that have book plates where I sign. There's like a sticker that I autograph that's customized, and they stick it in. So 44th and 3rd booksellers in the West End in Atlanta, Georgia, should have some. If not, let me know. I'll send you some more. So, and definitely support those other authors, because the door has cracked open. And if you want to see more books like this, more media content, or just entertainment content like this in general, support it. If you need to give it as everybody's birthday present and Christmas presents, it's all appreciated. And I'll do whatever I can to help, keep doing this and letting these stories out.
It's awesome, man. Very proud of you.
Thank you.
It's
Who
pretty
knew, right?
awesome. Yeah, I knew. I mean, you've been talking. You talked about writing constantly, writing,
Hmm.
music, and things that irritate you.
Hmm.
Giving people rides. Hated giving
Yeah.
people rides.
I
And
was
now
Uber
you
before there was an Uber.
now you got somebody that you're gonna have to give a ride for the next let's see, she's 4, next
Yeah.
14 years.
Uh-huh, something like
Driver's
that.
license or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
because she has, like, her first dance recital in a couple weeks, so it all begins, yeah.
Congratulations and good luck. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you for sharing with us how how you process information, how you came up with it. I'm still like thinking in my head, like, how did like with this entire story arc, did she plan that out or did she just write it as it went along? Meaning, did you go through the process of writing it and that it kind of unveiled itself? Or was it something that you had an outline for and you knew where you wanted to end up?
I'm an outliner. Some people can write, they're called pantsers, writing by the seat of their pants. I can't do that and meet my deadlines. I have to outline, and that way I can look and see where I've stopped and what I'm gonna write tomorrow, and I can start thinking about that, sleeping on it and things like that, so when it's time to write, I can go.
That's fantastic. Thank you
Mhm.
so much. And don't forget, if you write a book, you own the rights to the story in the book, and you can sell that over and over to movie companies. So everybody who's writing
Something like that.
screenplays, think about it.
Yeah,
Maybe you write a book first.
yep, and then you can speaking on that, you can option the book and then get hired to write the screenplay, so then you got paid twice
You can get paid twice.
versus just selling the screenplay, only getting paid
Exactly. And
once.
that happens.
Mhm.
That happens. Or, and then sometimes because it's, they don't get too many drafts in, the actual writer ends up getting the credit, on the movie because they write the first or second draft. How many drafts of your book did you go through?
Oh my god. Once the book deal happened, about 3. Beforehand, I've made so many changes from first person to third person to back and forth and things like that, so, um, yeah.
So we say a 2-year process?
Remember, I first saw the picture 8 or 9 years
8 or
ago.
9 years ago. So in
I got
terms
the
of
book
actually starting it.
deal February 28, 19? Yeah, February 2019 is when I got the book deal. So and it came out in August of 21, so 2.5 years. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I finished it the week after the insurrection because it was like, "Are you gonna be able to finish the book?" And I'm like, "If I turn off the news, yeah."
So for people who write, remember, editing is a writing process.
Yes, the magic happens in rewrites. And if you are struggling with getting that first draft done, I recommend Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. She talks about the shitty first draft. And so when I get stuck, especially when I'm drafting, my goal for that day is to write the worst piece of shit ever written. And usually it's not that bad.
Awesome. Can we see any of your articles or essays anywhere?
You'd have to I need to again update my website and compile it all together. There is the op-ed on Time Magazine. There is an article on the History News Network, and I think that's it. I have an article on Sirens conference. That's a conference for women in fantasy literature
Oh
where I
wow.
talk about the Shuri comic that came out and how um they basically did Shuri like they did Tiana in Princess and the Frog, where she spent most of the storyline in another life form's body, so we don't physically see the black female character that we came to see. So I broke that down a little bit. That's a little off historical fiction, but I'm like a big Star Wars and superhero fan, so
You
yeah.
excited to see Obi-Wan Kenobi?
Yes, it's coming out for my birthday, I can't wait. I just finished watching, Rebels because I never finished watching it when it was on TV. I didn't have cable at the time, so I'm all caught up on that, and I'm trying to get into Resistance, but it's a little too manga-y for me, a little too silly, but I'm still pushing through.
All right. And the Ahsoka cartoon is coming. I mean, so not the cartoon, the actual live action.
Yes, yes, and for those who don't know, my daughter's actually named after Ahsoka Tano, so that's how serious it is.
Just
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
You're such a nerd.
I accept it. She
Yeah,
actually doesn't like Star Wars, it's too scary for her and too violent, but she likes the character.
because she's 4.
Yeah.
In a couple years, I think she'll be able to experience all of it.
Mhm.
It might be the time when you can like watch them all start to finish, and then she
Mhm.
can have the foundation, and then she can pick where she wants to go from there.
Yeah. We've already decided we're gonna show it to her in theatrical release order. That's
Oh,
the best way
really?
to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna start with 4 and then
Yep.
work your way through that, and then go
Mhm.
backwards.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I can understand that. Well,
Mhm.
listen, I know it's 7:03. I said
Yep.
you would be done in an hour.
Yes, thank you.
Say hello to your daughter. Say hello to your husband. Tell them
Mhm.
I said what's up.
I
You still
will.
haven't sent me a book. I have to buy your books and pay
Thank
for
you.
subscriptions to go get your articles because you never send me one because you don't care.
'Cause you
But
didn't ask.
no, I mean it's like, yo, Staten, you've been reading my stuff forever. Here's a copy of
Mhm.
the book. But the you
Uh-huh.
the thing
Shoot
is,
me shoot
you
me a
know I'll
mailing
buy them.
address.
Look, you
Mhm.
know I'll buy them. I haven't moved. You know I'll buy them.
I know how to drive to your place, but I don't even remember the number.
Are you kidding me? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were the only
Uh,
one of the few people that knew that I lived here.
yeah.
Right, I'm extremely reclusive. People are like don't understand. They're
Mhm.
like, it doesn't seem. He
I know
seems
where
like
the
he's
Bat
always
Cave
mad.
is.
He's like,
And
he
no, I'm
seems
not
like
gonna
he's always
tell.
mad. He's like, he seems like he's always mad. He's always frustrated.
That's
Bas-
just that's just the armor. He's a softie.
Jesus, thank you so much. I think you might have rated me. Um, No, no, no. I mean, it's a big
Mhm.
thing. I mean, when
Mhm.
somebody that's as popular as Jesus
Mhm.
takes the time to, send his listeners, which are listening, they listen to classic hip hop, and he's a hell of a DJ.
Mhm.
And then,
Oh.
it's kind of a hell of a left turn or right turn. It's an extreme turn to dial into a conversation and then hang out. And it's something that's not really music related or
Mhm.
not really street. It's something totally different that they weren't expecting. It's female Black history, something that we've had struggles telling,
Mhm. Mhm.
for a number of different reasons. The biggest reason is because there's always got to be a star. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like, there's, a lot of people wonder why there are not more people. Like, people were focused on Dr. King and Malcolm X. People were focused in another period on just Bethune and just, they were
Mhm.
just, at another period, people only were Frederick Douglass and
Mhm.
not Turner, he was years before that, but Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. And it's,
Mhm.
and you just don't learn about all the hundreds and hundreds of stories that weave together to give us the tapestry that's our history.
Mhm.
You know,
Oh, speaking of Harriet Tubman, when I went to Cooperstown in October, I flew into Syracuse, and I realized that Harriet Tubman's grave is an hour. It's about a 45 minute to an hour drive west of Syracuse. So I did get to visit Harriet Tubman and and spend time with her at her grave and stuff. And what's really cool that people don't realize is in the cemetery, she's surrounded by family members, like her brothers. The brothers and stuff she went back to free. Their families are buried all around her. And that's really dope.
yeah, it's amazing, right?
Mhm,
The power of family.
mhm,
All right, go be great.
mhm.
And thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for coming through. DJ
Thank you for
Los
your well wishes. I see them all.
DJ Los was on. I'm trying to get DJ Los and his dad on at the same time. Los is part of a DJ crew, 12 Tech Mob. He's a producer.
Mhm,
He's kind of an expert on hip hop in Detroit, and his dad is an incredible musician.
mhm,
And if you like dig into like all the things that Los's dad has influenced and affected, I mean everything from Death Row Records to
mhm,
the some of the snare sounds and sounds that are on Funkadelic. They're both amazing, talented people, and I look forward to talking to them soon.
mhm. That's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, it's gonna be dope. So thanks, Kaya. I'll catch up with you later. Stay in
Okay,
touch.
definitely. You know how to
Every
find me.
everybody, I don't have we're on a multi-tier system. So I don't know who to raid and who to pass you guys off to, but maybe let me know who you end up getting passed off to. Come back and watch the video anytime. It'll be up on Twitch for 2 weeks. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on my Facebook page. JasonStain.com is the website. Thanks so much. And I look forward to having another conversation soon. Kaya, I'll be reading your book along with all the stuff for Dan Charnas and enjoying it. And
Thanks.
I read all the stuff on your website.
Oh God.
All right, guys. Everybody take care. We out.
Bye.
Bye.